Hello, everyone. This is Ed Brenegar, and welcome to the Eddie Network podcast. My guest today is Devaraj Sandberg, and he is a therapist of very unusual and special, in this very unusual and special way that really appeals to the way I look at the world. And I'm really glad to have you here, Dev, to talk to us about your life and your work and what you're doing now and where you are and all kinds of different things. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Ed. Thank you for inviting me on your podcast. I'm super happy to be here. Thank you.
I am too. We met through Substack. Dev was a commenter on my Substack, and we just started talking to each other. And this is, I think, this is something which people should recognize about Substack, that it's a place of both writers and readers, and it is a place of readers who are writers. And I think that's a unique thing. I don't think these other platforms are quite like that. I think there are a lot of writing platforms, there are a lot of commenting platforms, but I don't think that there are platforms where there's a community of readers and writers who are the same that has kind of gathered. And you and I read each other's work, and we comment on each other's work, and I think that's how we ended up coming together today to have a conversation. So why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do and how you came to do the kind of therapy you're doing?
Well, essentially, I went through a kind of a life crisis in my late 30s about 25 years ago, and just somewhere resolved to just do loads of therapy. And I didn't really know anything about therapy at the time. I went to various different schools and saw different therapists in the London area. I'm from the UK originally. And I ended up doing a lot of work with therapists who come through from Indian mystic teacher called Osho, a rather controversial character. Back in the 70s and 80s, he was. And I started doing a lot of groups with them, which were based a lot around a thing called body-based therapy or Reichian therapy. And really, over the course of like a decade, I guess I kind of cleared enough stuff out of my system. It was a lot of screaming and shouting. It was a lot of work with my judgments about other people, their judgments about me, all the emotions it brought up. It was a lot of very, very intense therapy, basically, not kind of sitting around talking about things, not that there's anything wrong with that, but really getting in there, expressing, working with the body, understanding judgments, putting them out. And after about a decade of that stuff, somewhere it had kind of unblocked me sufficiently and somehow allowed me to develop enough self-awareness to have a more functional life, basically, and to start to get my social needs better met. And, for friends and girlfriend, lovers, and to have a role in society. And previous to that, one of the main things I trained in briefly, I was working in, was an electrician in construction, but I didn't see that. I enjoyed being an electrician and being useful to people, but I didn't see it as a long-term thing. I didn't want to be 55, 60, getting covered in dust and groveling about on my knees, undoing people's sockets and stuff, And so I started to just become a therapist, basically. I moved into a spiritual community in the UK. I ended up living there for 17 years. And aside of other ways that it was a developmental journey for me, it also gave me a lot of experience working with people as a therapist. And then when I moved out of there around 2019, I just started working out in the world with two types of related therapy, Reichian breathwork and bioenergetics, both of which had kind of come out of the States, mostly though Europe to a degree, in the sort of middle part of the last century, and had kind of fallen out of view a little bit. But there were still, people who were into them or interested in the role of the body in psychology or psychotherapy. And so I just started. I noticed initially that no one was really creating much content around that in terms of YouTube or social media. And so I started around 2016, before I left the community, a YouTube channel on bioenergetics, and that became pretty popular. And it led to me creating like more paid for content, online courses. It led to me starting to write books on the topic because there were very few books. There were a lot of theoretical books, but not many which just had practical details of exercises and that kind of thing. And so I slowly developed a whole career out of that, basically, and running sessions and workshops as well with people face to face.
So what does it mean? Well, let me ask it this way. So it sounds to me that body-based therapy is different than, say, conversation-based, or like where you're simply trying to deal with your emotions, and also the kind of psychiatric therapy, which has a lot of pharmaceutical treatment to it. So, can you describe the differences between maybe your approach and these other approaches?
Yeah, I mean, traditional psychotherapy, the role of the therapist is to get you to introspect maybe on your childhood, on your relationship with your parents, where any traumatic events in your childhood, and to look at how patterns that were set up at that time or emotions that became repressed at that time or kind of avoidant behaviors that became cemented into your psyche at that time are still playing out today and causing you to have like a suboptimal life experience, maybe in relationships or friendships or at work. That's psychotherapy. And then I guess with drug intervention, pharmaceutical intervention stuff, it's like, you're looking, say, for example, at like probably what we call Prozac, fluoxetine. It's affecting. I'm not a neuroscientist, but it changes how the brain metabolizes certain important brain chemicals, serotonin in this case, and so it allows it to stay in certain receptor areas of the brain for a bit longer, with the idea of kind of lifting your mood. It's used as a treatment for depression for many people and has been for many times. What I'm doing really is just working much more with the body. The underlying theory behind it is that traumatic events from our childhood that are not fully processed are also stored as a kind of energetic charge in the body, and may have caused the body also to either sort of kind of armor certain areas of the muscle system or actually evacuate certain areas of the muscle system. And furthermore, that there are kind of personality types which are to a large degree based around traumatic events in childhood, and also to a large degree on our DNA, probably. And so, if I'm doing something, I might be putting my body in like a posture, like standing and leaning backwards, and then I breathe and feel the body for a certain length of time, and then go into a counter stretch. And this starts to open up certain areas of the muscle system, essentially, and it allows some form of gentle cathartic release to happen, because really what's happened is too much awareness has come into the head for most people. And then when it goes back into the body, when the body is less armored, when it's more receptive to feeling, then, we just feel better. We feel more open, more grounded.
Yeah.
Like, I think everybody inside wants to feel more open. They want to feel like they're a good human being who can be open to people, but who can also put down safe boundaries, because that's the problem with openness. You don't quite know who you're going to let in. Even though people will become successful sometimes in life by developing, more Machiavellian or controlling or power strategies, somewhere deep inside, most people have I think maybe it's even a Christian thing, have a kind of longing to just be an open human being that gets respect and love from people, and yet can also take a position, can be an authority when it's necessary, when the situation calls for it. And so working with the body, sometimes in conjunction with psychotherapy, can help to get us towards that space.
So it sounds like this is I'm gonna create a classification. Let's say that this sounds like an embodied spirituality. That that you're addressing the spiritual side of a person, but that spirit is embedded in the body itself, so that let's say past regrets, guilt, trauma, all those things, past memories, all those things are embedded in the body, and they need some kind of release, some kind of resolution, some kind of reconciliation that addresses the past with the present. Am I right about that?
Yeah, yeah, in a sense. I mean, I don't know about spirituality so much. I've certainly been in spiritual environments for long periods. Sometimes that becomes interpreted as like lots of kind of mystical theories about God and the angels and the chakras or whatever, which is all okay. But really, what all I'm doing at the end of the day, and it's my own path as well, is feeling the body more. That's pretty much what it comes down to. It's like for most people these days, especially those who don't live a purely kind of agrarian lifestyle, which few people obviously do these days, our experience of the body, the sense of the body is kind of a very dull thing in the background somewhere, and what we're most interested in is like sensory experiences, whether directly or through screens, and thinking behaviors and talking about stuff and ideas, and at times human emotions, anger, emotional pain. But the sense of a body is kind of, as an aspect of our moment by moment conscious experience, is kind of pushed to the bottom of the stack, so to speak. And the work I'm doing is essentially trying to expand it, bring it, because I find the more you can feel your body, the more someone can feel their body, the more psychologically healthy they are. Basically, it's like a huge resource, particularly in times when our mental way of navigating the world is getting thrown. Such as in the kind of crises or major events that have been happening, over the last few years.
I see what you're talking about is fitting into this field of brain science, which is now kind of emerging as something becoming more and more popular to discover and to talk about, and the brain science of the two hemispheres, of the right and left hemisphere, and how the right hemisphere is really the creative and imaginative and has the larger picture, and that's where a lot of this, a lot of the release of the body stuff from the brain side of things begins to happen, and I think that's really interesting. So what's your take on all of that aspect of the body, particularly where the brain is involved?
Well, I think, I think the brain science is really interesting. And, when I occasionally jump into some argument between a brain scientist and a psychologist on Twitter, I'm more likely to take the brain scientist's side, which traditionally isn't done by psychologists or people working in psychology. And I'm not graduated as a clinical psychologist. But of course, what's become kind of an issue, and I think a lot of people are aware of it, really, is that because modern day science, certainly since the 60s, 70s, has kind of, it's evolved in an environment where commercial concerns are paramount. There's not the government does support some level of research or in medical science and stuff like that, but mostly it comes about where there's a clear practical financial application. And that doesn't have to be bad, but it tends to skew science, towards, say, producing, when you're looking at brain chemistry, okay, but is that, some guy in the management of a company is going to kind of say, well, we need, in order to justify, X number of millions of R&D dollars, we need to see that there's an end product at the end of the line that we can sell and recoup that cost. And, that's skewed science to the degree that often there's probably a lot of stuff about the brain and the body that could be really interestingly researched, but there's no funding to do that, really. It's just, which is just an inevitable consequence of the system that science is in these days, and I think since COVID particularly, more and more people are aware of that, and that we've got this amazing resource of science, but it's become very skewed towards producing at the end of the day something that can justify the money, which is not unreasonable, but it is not optimal either.
Well, one of the things that I'm seeing in regard to that is that there is more and more people who are doing their own research. and I would call them independent scientific researchers. That would be the label I would, and they remind me of, 100 years ago when, the first quantum physicists and mathematicians, were becoming known, and they were being awarded Nobel Prizes for physics or math or something. And and many of them began in the same way, which is, they began as an independent researcher. They had a question. I mean, look at Einstein. He was the three main papers that kind of made him the star that he was. He wrote while he was working at the patent office in Switzerland. I mean, so I think maybe we're in an age where that is returning. I know some people who are doing research, and I'm very impressed with who they are. There is,
what I've been quite inspired by recently and made me feel quite hopeful with science was, I mean, it is guys like Andrew Huberman, who go out and create podcasts about all sorts of interesting stuff. And, I was in the kind of, drug therapy scene, psychoactive substances, 20, 25 years ago. And there was a lot of talk in that time, but the government would deregulate DMT or ketamine or psilocybin, these kind of psychoactive substances, and start to study them for psychiatric applications. And it never really happened. People thought it might during the Obama era, and it never really happened. And now it is starting to happen. 25 years later, there are starting to be research programs on things. So that's quite inspiring and exciting to see.
It is exciting, and I see that practitioners like yourself are a part of the spectrum of this scientific, kind of new scientific age. I'm just coining that phrase right now, that there's a new scientific age that's going to emerge out of what we've experienced over the last 3 years. And simply by observing, your clients and in how they respond to the techniques that you're providing them, you learn something, and out of that comes patterns that you begin to see recurring in people, and maybe recurring across a spectrum of people.
Well, it varies. With clients, it varies. I mean, a lot of people will have heard of this therapy, or they will have heard of Wilhelm Reich, who was a student of Freud, who's one of the kind of founders in the West, who fell into disrepute in the US and eventually died in prison. But prior to that, wrote a heap of books and has still got followers and that kind of thing. So they might be interesting that they might have learned a bit about character structure, which is one of the things he created, which is a very useful way of modeling 5 kind of personality types, which myself and a few other Westerners have kind of brought up to date to the kind of 2020s in our writings. So they may have been inspired by that to suddenly think, oh my God, I'm like totally oral, or I'm a massive endurer because of my dad when I was 2, or I've got this huge dissociative tendency. They start to look into these things online, and they come across me. And then in a typical session, there'll be some talking, just getting clear and what's going on with the person, what can help. And prior to a session, I'll usually have done some kind of intake form with some kind of Reichian personality quiz, which I devised myself. And then I'll give them a series of exercises to do, usually along to a kind of ding track that you play in the background. So you have 4 or 5 postures, and you need to go through it daily, or like 5 times a week minimum. And then you come back for another session a couple of weeks later, and we discuss how it's going and see how things are moving. I mean, it's a good and useful approach. It's a good adjunct to psychotherapy. I mean, to go back a little bit to what you were saying before, when I looked at Britain coming out of COVID, and with the mental health stats where they were, with just so many people in depression and trying to get treatment and that kind of thing, I can say with pretty much good 90, 100% confidence that if you gave me 15, 20 people with significant depression, clinically evaluated, and I could work with them for 2 hours, 3 hours a week for 6 weeks, I would take 70% of them out of that state. It's you don't yes, drugs are useful for some people, and there are always extreme cases, and there are always people who are treatment resistant. But it's not just for body work, it's also what people are missing is connection. What they're missing is being able to share with other people. They lack, clinical psychology, for all its value, it's too cerebral. It doesn't include basic social human values, which are actually encoded in our DNA, because we are a biologically evolved species who, we what makes us relax is feeling some level of connection with another person, either physical or felt, emotionally, being able to feel safe to share about your inner world, the parts that you're hiding because you think you're going to get judged or whatever. These things take the load off. Working with the body in a gentle way as well. I'm confident I could take 70% of people out. Not everybody, but I could take 70% of people out, and it might be for them that those guys need to continue meeting and talking. And depression and anxiety, in my opinion, for a majority of people, are absolutely easily treatable for virtually zero cost. You just need people who've got some experience, but those people aren't really around. The system doesn't create them.
So what do you think is the origin or the trigger for that anxiety and that stress? What when you begin talking to people, what is it they're saying that is it let me be more explicit. Are they saying it's a relational thing? Are they saying it's a dealing with change in their life? Are they saying it's not feeling that they're being very productive? And I mean, what is it that people, I'm curious, because I'm thinking that there are people that are going to watch this who are in a situation where maybe they have never thought about doing some kind of therapeutic treatment, and this suggests that they may benefit from something like you're doing, which may be an entry point for many people to do some kind of therapeutic process where they begin with the body, and then it reveals something else that is needed for them to address. It may be some brain stuff, or it may be something else. I don't know what it might be. So where is the starting point for people to think about this?
Well, let's look at anxiety and depression a little bit separately, because they're kind of different, and there's some crossover sometimes. I mean, anxiety is basically a narrative in your mind constantly telling you you're not okay and that you need to change your state. That when you talk to someone who's suffering anxiety and you put that to them, 9 times out of 10, they'll nod. Yeah, that's basically what it is. You've got a constant feeling like you need to change your state. Like you need to take some food, you need to get out of the house, you need to do this, you even need to do your bioenergetic practice, whatever. The underlying, it's not really, it's basically a voice inside your mind telling you need to change your state. That's really what anxiety is. And the easiest way that you can look at it from modern psychology, I think, and from a field often called parts work, is by, we all have a kind of guardian inside, as in terms of this kind of sub-personality. And this guardian, it's a little bit like one of those, those stories about Japanese soldiers still fighting the war on an island, like 50 years after it's finished, and that kind of thing. It's like that. It's still, it's protecting you from stuff which you can now feel and process. And because it's pushing down, this kind of guardian figure on, and there's a sense, energy and feeling coming up from the body, and then the guardian's pushing down, and then and the guardian, and it's sending you into anxiety. There's a clash going on, and so really the guardian has to be just stand down a little bit and just allow you to feel, and focusing on the sense of the body and slowly opening the body. There's basic ways that you can train a lot of people to start to come out of anxiety. Now, that's not necessarily going to work for 100% of people. Sometimes it can be acute, sometimes it can need other interventions, and sometimes it can really be a journey. These are not quick fix therapies. I want to make that clear. You know, it can be a journey, it can be a start point, but you can get an understanding of what it is. You know, it's very rare. I sometimes watch presentations on anxiety, and often they get it very complicated, and that's all it really is. It's just like this sense that you're not okay right now, not okay. You need to do something to change your state. You know, and people will use substances on a daily basis, whether it's alcohol, tobacco, caffeine, whatever. You know, part of it can be to alleviate anxiety, which is really just this overactive guardian protector figure inside the psyche. That's one way of seeing it. Depression is usually, it's another adaptive strategy to kind of keep, one part of it can be to keep a very low self-image, you know, because if we have a lot of people come to me for low self-esteem, you know, and low self-esteem, the first thing I'm going to tell someone, as long as I think they can take it, is that it's a defense. It's a defense, low self-esteem. Most people like to think of it as some kind of clinical condition or whatever, but that's not so psychologically useful to think of it that way. It's a defense, because if you stay small, like the soldiers in World War I in the trenches, you keep your head down, less likely you're going to get shot. And if you stay small, then you don't expose yourself to high risk, particularly the risk of feeling a great deal, you know, feeling a lot of emotions. It's very, very challenging. So that aspect of depression, of keeping small, is one aspect, you know, which is a defensive strategy. Another aspect, it's almost like simply just, for some people, it's literally just pushing down on the psyche, and just pushing stuff down, which is sometimes reinforced with substances or ritualistic behaviors, whatever. You know, it's just a way of not feeling. To give a little bit example of the depth of it, you know, when you look at, say you're talking about depression, I mean, one big thing around depression often is a fear of getting angry. You know, the person, and that often tracks back to the age of about 2. And at the age of 2, you know, I mean, I'm not a parent, so I never had kids, but like, parents will often talk about the terrible twos, when a child goes from being this kind of blissful state, you're smiling, so you probably had experience for yourself, to kicking off about everything, screaming, shouting, raging about the slightest little thing. And some parents are a bit slack there and just allow the child to do what they want and don't give it enough sense of boundaries. That's one issue. Some have quite a good way of holding boundaries and still giving care and love. And some come in too hard. They come in like, this child needs to be told, I need them under control, you know. And what happens in a 2-year-old's mind at that time, if their nervous system perceives that one of the parents is extremely angry and might be going to leave, that's registered as a survival threat. And so that person will learn to completely suppress anger, completely suppress individuality. You know, it's like, and that will be registered in their nervous system at the age of 2 as a psychological need for survival. And there is no program in the human brain that will cause that to unravel. There's no program. I mean, I'm making a few assumptions about the human brain, but I've got no experience of any. You know, it will just go on running. So the fact that the person is now 18, 20, 30, 40, 50, and is more than capable of being, you know, they're not under a survival threat if their parents leave, and obviously the parents will probably be passed away by then. That program is still running. You know, it's like they're still in this mode where they might kind of gossip or be angry or undermine, but they will never take a position for themselves, because it was encoded at the age of 2 that taking a position for yourself, expressing your emotions however you want, is a life threat. It's there at a survival threat level. So that's the kind of, you know, what more an example of the kind of thing that we're doing in this field, you know. And that's just with one character type, commonly known as the endurer, that arises from around 2 years of age. And most of us, if we have a working life, we will know people like that, you know, who just habitually troll along at work, and they kind of gossip and grumble in the background, and they moan about the boss, but they're never going to say, hey, I disagree with this, I think we should be doing it this way. It's more like, yeah, bloody hell, you know, this kind of endurer, someone who survives and endures life. And that can be tracked pretty much very, very accurately back to how they process being a 2-year-old.
That's
So
really,
it's just an example. Yeah.
that's really, really fascinating. And that's really helpful. That, because I see that. I mean, I see that in people, and there's it's yeah, it is fascinating, and you wonder, um, there's stories I could tell that I can't tell here, so that's why I'm hesitating. But I do understand what you're saying. So you have been take a little detour here. You have been sort of a world traveler over the last year and a half. Tell us a little bit about where you've been and why you're doing this. What's behind this?
Well, I think like I said earlier, I lived communally basically from 2002 to 2019, living in a spiritual community in the south of the UK in England. And at some point, it felt like there wasn't enough challenge in that for me. You know, some part of me is quite motivated to self-face and to develop. And it's by no means the whole of me. You know, I have plenty of other parts which are pretty lazy and sluggish. But there is a part of me, and that ended up in me kind of leaving the community where I was well established, where I had a good role and prestige and esteem and all of this kind of thing, and just getting a flat with my girlfriend at the time, who also decided she wanted to come with me. You know, in Brighton, quite a nice place just on the sea south of London. And then we lived there for a couple of years. COVID started. I was going back to the community, then I stopped going to the community because COVID started. They wanted to kind of insulate themselves off. I didn't personally agree with that, but it was their decision. That's fair enough. You get used when you live communally, you get used to communal decisions and accepting them gracefully when they don't go your way. You know, so then I kind of cut off from the community, which, looking back, had been a kind of a mothering environment as well for me in many ways. And then somewhere towards COVID started to kind of die out in the UK around mid 2021. You know, I mean, it was kind of like we had 7 months of lockdown, blah, blah, blah. That had triggered me quite a lot. 20 years before, I'd been well into kind of conspiracy theories and this kind of thing. I used to go and see David Icke and all of this. And I kind of gone through that and could see that a lot of it was to do with my relationship with my adopted father, and that I hadn't really had any kind of positive experience of authority as a child. And so I kind of worked through a lot of my kind of conspiracy belief systems, and I knew how powerful they could be. I'd been right down the rabbit hole. But when COVID came along, and I saw the way the media were all kind of going as like fish suddenly going in one direction with one narrative, I was super triggered back into all of that stuff. And then I kind of worked through that. I was a bit skeptical. I'd been through it before. But when COVID started to die out around middle 2021, me and my girlfriend split up. Our relationship was okay, but it wasn't really working for her and it wasn't really working for me. And so we decided to go our separate ways. And I wanted to travel more. Prior to joining the community in the early 2000s, I'd been traveling quite a lot in Southeast Asia, North Africa, here and there. And mostly winters, I would go away for a few months, you know, and then I'd stop doing that when I was living communally. And I'm half British genetically, I'm half Iranian, but I'm not quite sure. But I've never really wanted to just be in Britain, to be honest. And it was rather like, right, as soon as I'd split with my girlfriend, right, I'm getting out of here. You know, that was my kind of my feeling. You know, I just had enough of being on this island, and the media were also still ramping up a lot of. I was bored of the narrative warfare. Really, I didn't want it anymore. I didn't want to be told by the media how I should think about this issue or that issue. By then, I was making money online as a therapist because I developed some courses which people had asked me for, and that was going well. And I'd started that just before COVID started, fortuitously. And then when COVID came along, and a lot of people obviously wanted to work on themselves online, so courses were going well. I was making money, so I thought, well, I'm just going to travel around, be a digital nomad with my laptop. I went to Kiev for 3 months. That was quite interesting. And before the war, a few months before the war started, then I was in Mexico for about 4 months. Then I was in Istanbul, and then I came to Georgia, not the state of the US, but the country by the Black Sea, the other side of Turkey. And I decided at that point I'm going to stay here for a while because I felt like I was constantly having to go out and make friends. You know, it had been I have a lot of friends in the UK and friends that I picked up from my time in the community and from doing a lot of therapist training, and you make very deep friends like that, very deep friendships, going through all kind of mad workshops together. And so I liked Friends. I was still quite an oral kind of character. I had this kind of underlying neediness, which I thought I'd kind of cleared more than I really had. And then traveling a lot, I'd constantly have to go out and meet friends. And you could do it, I could do it, but it was getting to be a bit of a drag. And I just thought, I want to stay in one place for a while. So I ended up spending 6, 7 months in Tbilisi, Georgia, enjoying that. And I've still got a flat there and quite a lot of stuff, which I rented out to someone else. But like, I only rent the flat, I haven't bought it.
So
And
when you
now I'm in Beirut basically for a month, and then Istanbul. I'm just kind of enjoying this area, like it's the kind of crucible of civilization in a sense.
yeah.
Lebanon and this area.
So when you enter into a new city in a new country, who is it you're looking for to connect with? Who are you connecting with when? Who is
Well,
the,
whoever speaks my language practically, basically on a friendship level, it's like if I'm in Georgia and I can't speak Georgian, I can't really go up to people and start speaking to them. And the second language is Russian, the third English there, but they're not a mega educated urban population. So in practical terms, what you do is, there's an assortment of apps on the phone, like Meetup, Couchsurfing, Internations is a kind of more corporate club, but also some interesting expats you can meet through that. And there's a thing called Nomad List. There's a thing called, on Facebook, there's often local expat groups. So those are 5 basic resources where you might find there are events going on, which are basically people who are traveling, solo travelers in particular, or expats who want to meet some more people, and so those are the kind of things you go along to those events. It's a bit scary, you don't know anybody, and you just start talking to people and slowly forge connections and friendships, basically. And it's great actually, because pretty much everyone that comes is looking for some form of friendship. They're looking for other people to hang out with. They're also in a strange city, and that's how it is. And then sometimes there's English language groups where people just could rock up to speak English, which is often a lot of local people who speak English to often a large degree. And you can also meet locals through those kind of events. Generally in a modern city of like 1 million or 1 million plus inhabitants, there'll be quite a bit of that stuff going on.
do you have a favorite place that you've been to at this point?
No, not really. Not really. It's been a journey for me. I like the edginess. What I've noticed is I like the edginess of some cities. You know, Tbilisi and even more so Beirut. It's a bit like something out of a film noir. Casablanca or something like that. Where these old movies where there's all sorts of characters washed up there from different parts of the world. Tbilisi has a little bit that energy. Huge Russian contingent fleeing Putin, more arty kind of people like that, and they're really interesting characters, And then you've got some Iranians there. I'm half Iranian myself. I like these kind of edgy places, but there's a bit of a collision of cultures or a big mix. Even more so, though I don't know it as well as Tbilisi, where there's just all sorts of, it's 50-50 Christian Muslim. A lot of Lebanese deny they're Arabs. They say they're Phoenicians. There's been civil wars. There's always some kind of lunacy going on. It's like you see the resilience of people. Whereas when I was in the UK, it's like life is so comfortable and people are still miserable as sin, but life is just completely comfortable. Something is really being overlooked somewhere often in these very rich Western countries, I think, and people, it's easy to say people don't appreciate what they have, but it's more intrinsic to the human mind that we somewhere need some level of developmental challenge, even if it's through adversity, to give us something.
That's a fascinating thing you've just said, and I would agree with you. And I don't know what it is in the human psyche that, for some people, they want stasis. They want to be secure, and they don't want change. And then there are those of us who thrive on change, and we thrive on the newness of the world, and we thrive on meeting new people. I mean, this is why I created this podcast, is so I could meet people from around the world. It's an experiment in networking. and so it's, it's a product of the how different people can be. And kind of going back to where we started, there is a relationship within us to all the parts of us. I think by using the metaphor of relationship rather than the metaphor of mechanics or mechanism, I think we begin to see that we relate to these parts of us, and we relate to people that we meet, and we relate to the cultures that we walk into. I mean, I've been in the last decade, I've been in 15 different countries other than the US, and it's been fascinating. And in most of those situations, I traveled alone. And in most of those situations, I had no difficulty finding out the information I needed. And all I speak is English, and no difficulty in getting around. And, you have to be aware. I mean, I remember the first day I was in Nairobi in 2019. I'd flown in the night before, and there was a group of us that was going to gather, and we were going to a conference, a training conference. And one of the persons that was there, she and I went in, took a cab into the city, and we were walking around just kind of seeing things. And it was obvious to me, this is the kind of the awareness that you begin to build up if you're paying attention, that we were in a part of the city where there's probably a high crime rate, where people, Westerners like ourselves, would be stalked, and if we were put into if we find ourselves in an alley, we would probably be attacked and robbed. And so I'm watching what's going on, and she was too, and we were being followed, and so we had to make some choices as to how we were going to extricate ourselves from being followed. And I'm not going to over dramatize it, because it wasn't really a dramatic experience. It just was an awareness that, okay, we have been targeted, because we stand out, and we were both white, and it's not a racial thing. It's that, okay, these are vulnerable outsiders here, and we can take advantage of this situation, which is what happens in every place in every world. So, but we found a way to get out of that situation, and we were okay. And no harm, no confrontation, nothing ever happened. But we were aware that that sort of thing was going on, and that's part of, I think, what you just described, which is that sense of riskiness or edginess that comes with that kind of moving into worlds that are not normally your world, and trying to understand how to fit into it and to operate within it. And it is a fascinating sort of thing. And well, if people want to find you, would like to talk to you about having maybe some therapy with you, how did they find you?
I think the easiest way is just to put Devaraj Sandberg into Google. You can also look for my website, which is bioenergetics.org.uk, or they can look for me on Amazon. I've got some books there on therapy, and they can also look for me on YouTube. If you put Devaraj Bioenergetics into YouTube or Google, you're going to find me pretty quick. I've got a YouTube channel that's quite well followed. So I'm pretty easy to find, basically.
And you got a Substack.
I've got a Substack, but that's just somewhere where I just write whatever's going on in my head, where I don't have to be professional or think about being a therapist and stuff like that, where I can just explore ideas out, because I think that's very useful in today's world. It's like you're saying, when you go to a foreign country, you're inviting challenge into your life. Your life becomes more of a kind of dialectical engagement with your environment. When you know everybody in a town, and you've got all your relationships established, that is usually missing, or it's much, much less.
Mhm.
You know, it's like you're starting to invite almost like a little demon spirit, which is also developmental, you know, into your life. You're inviting them back into your life. You're
Yes,
taking a risk. You're taking yourself out of a comfort zone. And for me, in a sense, I also do that by coming to places like Beirut, but also writing, you know, just putting ideas and theories out also invites some dialectical kind of engagement with people where I have an outlet to express themes that my mind is, it's cathartic for me, you know. I'm grateful that but it's that I don't need to do something marketing or just try to attract certain people. I can pretty much write whatever I like there, and then you know people may or may not like it, but like it's like, but it gives me an outlet of expression. You know, my I always wanted to be more of a painter, but words are more my natural thing. You know.
I agree with you. I totally agree with you. Well, Deborah, it's been great to have you here. I've learned a lot. You've altered some of my perception of therapy, and I'm grateful for that too. And and it's now I have stuff to go study. Now I have more things to learn, and and that's a what better thing to say about a conversation that okay, I'm leaving with something to go learn more about, and so I'm grateful for that, and I wish you well, and the rest of your time in Beirut, and the next stage of your journey, and I look forward to seeing you in Substack.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. My
My
pleasure.
pleasure. And everyone, thank you. Please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel here and to Substack so that we can stay in touch. And I very much appreciate your comments because your comments are not simply signals. They're actually a way to have conversation. And in this case, conversation with Dev and me. And I appreciate you doing that because I think we all benefit from that. And I have found um, uh, people that I really enjoy now from simply beginning with a comment that offers to add to the conversation that was in the column or the post that the person had given. So come visit there and make sure you have something that you can offer, and I appreciate that very much. And so we'll see you next time. See you. Thank you. Bye bye.